War is decided not by the battles fought, but by the decisions made before the first shot is fired. In World War II, 5 choices, made by men who believed they were ensuring victory, became the architects of catastrophic defeat. These were not accidents of fate or failures of courage. They were calculated strategic decisions, born from logic that seemed sound in the moment, executed with conviction, and remembered as some of the most devastating miscalculations in military history. Before we go deeper into how these decisions changed the war forever, make sure to subscribe for more history that actually happened. The first decision began not with tanks or aircraft, but with a single word: Barbarossa. On June 22, 1941, 3 million German soldiers crossed into Soviet territory along an 1,800-mile front. Operation Barbarossa was the largest invasion force ever assembled. 153 divisions, 3,000 aircraft, 7,000 artillery pieces, and 600,000 vehicles, moving east in 3 massive army groups. Adolf Hitler believed the Soviet Union would collapse within weeks. His generals had planned for a swift campaign to end before winter. Intelligence estimates predicted Soviet forces would crumble under the weight of blitzkrieg tactics that had shattered Poland and France. The logic appeared sound. Stalin's purges had gutted the Red Army officer corps. Soviet performance in Finland had been disastrous. German military doctrine had proven superior in every theater. But the logic contained a fatal assumption: that the Soviet Union was a state that could be defeated like France, that capturing Moscow would end the war, that Soviet industrial capacity could be destroyed before it relocated beyond the Urals. The German advance was initially devastating. Army Group Center reached within 200 miles of Moscow by October. Leningrad was encircled. Kiev fell with over 600,000 Soviet prisoners. But the Soviet Union did not collapse. Factories were dismantled and moved east on 1,500 trains. New armies appeared, where German intelligence said none existed. The Red Army lost over 3 million men in the first 5 months and kept fighting. When winter arrived in November, German forces discovered they had prepared for a short war. Soldiers lacked winter uniforms. Vehicles had no antifreeze. Weapons froze in temperatures that dropped to minus 40 degrees. The T-34 tank, dismissed by German intelligence, proved superior to German armor in mobility and firepower. By December, the Wehrmacht had suffered 800,000 casualties. The Blitzkrieg had failed. Germany now faced the war of attrition Hitler had desperately sought to avoid, a 2-front conflict against enemies with vastly superior manpower and industrial capacity. The mathematics were brutal. The Soviet Union could replace losses. Germany could not. Every kilometer east stretched supply, lines that depended on a rail network running on different gauge tracks. Every week of fighting consumed fuel reserves Germany did not possess. The decision to invade without defeating Britain first, without adequate winter equipment, without understanding the scale of Soviet industrial mobilization, transformed what Hitler envisioned as a swift campaign into the meat grinder that would consume the Wehrmacht. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, 80% of all German military casualties had occurred on the Eastern Front. Operation Barbarossa was not a military operation that failed. It was the decision that ensured Germany would lose the war. The second decision was made not by an aggressor, but by a defender who believed his fortifications were impregnable. The Maginot Line stretched from the Swiss border to Belgium, a system of underground fortresses, artillery casemates, and reinforced bunkers built at enormous expense through the 1930s. French military doctrine, shaped by the slaughter of World War I, viewed defense as the supreme strategic principle. The Maginot Line embodied that philosophy. It was a wall of steel and concrete designed to make invasion impossible. But the line ended at the Belgian border. This was not an oversight. Belgium was a French ally. Extending fortifications along the Belgian frontier would signal France expected Belgium to be attacked through French territory, a diplomatic impossibility. French planners believed German forces would have to attack through Belgium, just as they had in 1914. The French army would then advance into Belgium and fight the decisive battle on Belgian soil, protecting French territory from devastation. On May 10, 1940, German forces did exactly what French doctrine predicted. They invaded Belgium. French and British forces moved north to meet them. But the main German attack came through the Ardennes forest, a region French commanders had deemed impassable for large mechanized forces. 7 panzer divisions crossed the Meuse River at Sedan, punched through French lines, and raced west toward the English Channel. Within 10 days, they had cut off the entire Allied force in Belgium. The British Expeditionary Force evacuated from Dunkirk. France sued for armistice 6 weeks after the invasion began. The Maginot Line, which had absorbed a third of France's military budget for a decade, was never breached. German forces simply went around it. The failure was not engineering. The fortifications performed exactly as designed. The failure was strategic imagination. French planners had built a system to prevent the last war, not anticipate the next one. They had spent billions on fixed defenses, while Germany developed mobile warfare doctrine. They had assumed the Ardennes was impassable when German commanders understood that difficulty was not impossibility. They had committed their best mobile units to Belgium, leaving their strategic flank defended by second-rate divisions. The Maginot Line represented the most expensive military decision of the interwar period, and it was rendered irrelevant in 72 hours. France fell not because its defenses were weak, but because its strategic vision was anchored to the past. The third decision was made in the air, over cities that had never been bombed before. On September 7, 1940, the Luftwaffe shifted its bombing campaign from British airfields to London. For 2 months, German aircraft had attacked Royal Air Force bases, radar stations, and aircraft factories. Fighter command was reaching its breaking point. Pilot losses exceeded replacement rates. Airfields in southern England were cratered and barely operational. RAF commanders estimated they could sustain the campaign for perhaps 2 more weeks. Then Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, redirected the entire strategic focus to terror-bombing British cities. The decision was retaliation. British bombers had struck Berlin on August 25th. Hitler demanded vengeance. Göring complied, believing the Blitz would break British morale and force Churchill to negotiate. The effect was immediate and opposite to German expectations. RAF airfields were given time to repair. Fighter production, which had been targeted, continued uninterrupted. Pilot losses declined as German bombers now flew into concentrated anti-aircraft defenses over cities rather than dispersed fighter opposition over airfields. British civilian casualties mounted, 40,000 killed by May 1941, but morale did not collapse. Instead, the Blitz unified British resolve. Churchill's speeches, broadcast from bomb shelters, framed the campaign as a test of national character. Factory workers returned to production facilities the morning after raids. The Royal Air Force, given breathing space to rebuild, began inflicting unsustainable losses on German bomber formations. By the spring of 1941, the Luftwaffe had lost the Battle of Britain without achieving air superiority, the prerequisite for Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of England. Germany now faced the strategic nightmare Hitler had sought to avoid, a war on 2 fronts. The decision to bomb cities instead of military infrastructure represented a fundamental misunderstanding of strategic air power. Terror bombing did not break industrial societies. It hardened them. The Luftwaffe had possessed a narrow window to cripple fighter command. Göring's decision to shift to city bombing closed that window and ensured Britain would remain in the war, providing the base from which Allied forces would eventually invade Europe. The fourth decision was made not on battlefields, but in conference rooms, where men in suits decided the fate of millions. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The strike was tactically brilliant. 18 ships sunk or damaged, 100. 88 aircraft destroyed, 2,400 Americans killed. Admiral Yamamoto had executed the most successful surprise attack in naval history. But the attack contained a fatal omission. Japanese aircraft had targeted battleships, symbols of naval power from the previous era. They had ignored the fuel storage tanks that held 4.5 million barrels of oil, the submarine base that would become the foundation of America's Pacific campaign, and the repair facilities that would return damaged ships to service within months. Most critically, America's 3 aircraft carriers had been at sea and escaped unscathed. Japan had achieved tactical surprise while making a strategic blunder that would define the Pacific War. The decision to attack America was born from Japan's belief that a swift, devastating blow would force negotiation. Japanese planners understood they could not win a prolonged war against American industrial capacity. Their strategy depended on destroying American will to fight. But the attack produced the opposite effect. American isolationism evaporated overnight. Congress declared war with only one dissenting vote. Factories that had been producing civilian goods converted to military production. Shipyards began constructing aircraft carriers at a rate Japan could not match. Within 6 months, America had launched the Doolittle Raid on Tokyo. Within a year, Japanese naval aviation, the finest in the world in December 1941, was crippled at Midway. The mathematics were overwhelming. In 1941, American steel production exceeded Japan's by a factor of 12 to 1. American oil production was 700 times greater. America could absorb losses and rebuild. Japan could not. The decision to attack Pearl Harbor transformed a regional conflict into a global war Japan had no capacity to win. Yamamoto himself understood this. He had warned that Japan could run wild for 6 months to a year, but after that, he had no confidence in victory. His warning was ignored. The attack succeeded tactically and failed strategically, awakening an industrial giant that would produce more aircraft carriers in 1 year than Japan built during the entire war. The fifth decision was made in the frozen ruins of a city that no longer had strategic value. In August 1942, German forces reached Stalingrad. The city, named for Stalin, held symbolic importance, but its military value was limited, a transportation hub on the Volga, but not a critical objective for Germany's strategic goals in the Caucasus oil fields. Hitler ordered the city taken. Soviet forces defended it. What began as an operational objective became a battle of annihilation. The German Sixth Army, under General Friedrich Paulus, committed 330,000 men to urban combat that devoured entire divisions. Every building became a fortress, every street a killing ground. Soviet reinforcements crossed the Volga, night under German artillery fire. Neither side would retreat. By November, the Sixth Army had captured 90% of Stalingrad, but was exhausted, undersupplied, and dangerously overextended. On November 19th, Soviet forces launched Operation Uranus, a double envelopment that cut off the Sixth Army in a pocket 200 miles wide. German commanders urged immediate breakout. Hitler refused. He ordered Paulus to hold and promised resupply by air. The Luftwaffe attempted to deliver 500 tons of supplies daily. It never delivered more than 100. Soldiers starved. Fuel ran out. Ammunition was rationed. By January, the Sixth Army had ceased to exist as a fighting force. On February 2, 1943, Paulus surrendered. 91,000 Germans went into Soviet captivity. Only 5,000 returned. The decision to hold Stalingrad represented Hitler's fundamental misunderstanding of operational flexibility. The Sixth Army could have broken out in November with acceptable losses. Instead, it was destroyed completely. Germany lost not just 300,000 men, but an entire army's worth of equipment, officers, and veteran soldiers who could not be replaced. The psychological impact was greater. Stalingrad was the first time a German field marshal had surrendered. It shattered the myth of Wehrmacht invincibility. It proved Germany could be beaten not just tactically, but operationally and strategically. The Soviet Union, which Hitler had expected to collapse in weeks, had absorbed catastrophic losses and destroyed Germany's finest army. The decision to fight for Stalingrad, a city with more symbolic than strategic value, consumed resources Germany desperately needed elsewhere and marked the turning point on the Eastern Front. These 5 decisions shared a common architecture. Each was made by leaders who believed they understood the strategic landscape. Each was executed with conviction and competence at the tactical level. And each contained assumptions that proved catastrophically wrong. Operation Barbarossa assumed the Soviet Union was fragile. The Maginot Line assumed the next war would resemble the last. The Blitz assumed terror would break morale. Pearl Harbor assumed a knockout blow would force negotiation. Stalingrad assumed symbolism justified any cost. None of these assumptions survived contact with reality. The commanders who made these decisions were not fools. They were professionals operating with incomplete information, shaped by doctrines that had worked before, constrained by political pressures that valued decisiveness over caution. But war punishes assumption. It reveals the gap between what planners believe will happen and what actually occurs when millions of men, thousands of machines, and the chaos of combat interact. These 5 decisions did not lose the war in a single moment. They created conditions from which recovery became impossible, resource shortages that compounded, strategic positions that could not be regained, industrial imbalances that widened with every month. The legacy of these decisions extends beyond World War II. They became case studies in military academies worldwide. Operation Barbarossa taught the danger of underestimating enemy resolve. The Maginot Line demonstrated that static defense invites operational maneuver. The Blitz proved that targeting civilian morale was less effective than destroying military capacity. Pearl Harbor showed that tactical success without strategic vision breeds disaster. Stalingrad revealed that prestige is not worth the destruction of irreplaceable forces. These lessons were written in blood, learned at costs measured in millions of lives, and studied by every generation of military leaders since. The men who made these decisions believed they were ensuring victory. History recorded them as the architects of defeat. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.